Can we start anytime?
Whatever.
Just a reminder that we're not engaging in this conversation. The only people who will be talking will be Julie, Erica, and possibly Tina.
Okay.
And you have permission at any time to stop and say, I'm stuck. And you have permission any time to stop and say, I didn't like that one, try that one again.
So it's good being back in your classroom.
Yes.
Again, thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
So your questions today, your big guiding questions were around perseverance and strategies.
Yes.
So how do you think the students did?
After looking through their journals, I think that they use more strategies than I might have been aware of. They also all seem to be engaged for the majority of the work time, which was positive. I feel like maybe the problems were ones that they could actually access, so they didn't feel like they had to fall back on old habits of not persevering or not, digging deep into their non-strategies. So I think overall it was a pretty good day with their strategies and persevering.
So what strategies were you seeing that you were surprised about?
I was a little surprised how many people made graphs when they were given a slope and a point to write the equation of a line, because we had briefly talked about it yesterday, so I don't know if it's because it was fresh that they wanted to use it or it's what made sense. So, but then when they got to the table where the graph was given to them and they had to write the equation, they struggled with it. So it was interesting to see the change between two tables where they chose to graph it and then where it was already graphed for them and writing the equation.
So the students that struggled, what did you see them doing?
So with the graphing, a lot of them were struggling with the scale and finding the slope. They could all figure out the y-intercept, but then they got confused on does that go in the y or the b spot when they're actually writing the equation. They also were struggling with, I'm trying to think what Braden and I had a huge discussion about what the slope and the scale meant, and that was interesting to kind of see the misconceptions that he had about counting squares but then not taking into account the scale for the slope.
So what do you mean? What misconceptions or what was described up?
So the graph was drawn and it was by twos on both the y and the x-axis, but it went 3 one way and 2 the other, so he was getting 2/3, but he wasn't understanding that really it started as 4/6, and he should have simplified it to get 2/3. So I think if I were to do it again, I would make one where it doesn't make the same if you count the boxes, or simplify the fraction to kind of see, is he confused about the scale or is he confused about counting the boxes? So.
What else did you notice today?
Just trying to think. There was a lot of question about like why is the intercept called B? And I think we just haven't talked about it, or I think it's always been told to them that B is your y-intercept and they don't quite understand that that's your starting point. Because then when they would look at tables, they could find a starting point because they know that that's the last number that's added on. Like, I think we've really talked a lot about that. So they understand that that's their starting point, but I don't think they always get why it relates back to the y-intercept. So maybe bringing back in that x is 0 at that point might help kind of solidify.
So when you saw them not getting that, what were they doing to help to try to figure it out?
A lot of them were looking to their partner to help them, or they pulled up prior knowledge that I don't think is necessary from my class, but I think prior years they had knowledge about that was always the y-intercept, but I don't think they quite get why it's the y-intercept.
So they were using math language,
Yes.
in a way, and then explaining it
To their partners or across the tables. It seemed that there was at least one strong person in every group that got why it was the B, but wasn't always able to articulate it to their other teammates.
In the group that I was sitting in, you came over and were helping.
Yes.
Some that were really quite confused.
Very confused.
So what were your thoughts on that group?
I was really impressed that Raylene kept pushing through it, because she's one who in the past would just stop and be like, I don't get it, I'm done. And I think it was a good conversation. And Stosik's also one who doesn't tend to have a lot of status in the class. Like, he usually gets it, but he's not always one that'll stand up and be like, I got it right, and here's what happened. So I think it was really nice that he got it, and he had to help his teammates get it, so I think it helped him kind of talk through the process. But what I saw a lot of was that they don't get, back to the y-intercept. She knew that 4 started it, but then was confused where the -2 came in, because the equation is y equals -2x plus 4. So she I think she was starting to get, but then when Stasik brought in, well, just plug in your X's, then she was way confused. So that was interesting to see.
Did you expect those conversations?
I did. I kind of had a feeling because we talked about tables in September and we wrote a lot of equations from tables, but I don't think we did a lot of equations to tables. So it was interesting to see how they went backwards.
So this hadn't been talked about since September.
Right. So, I mean, it's come up occasionally, but it hasn't been a focus of conversation.
Can I?
Please.
One thing is to kind of always make sure that the ultimate goal is to help kind of figure out the strategies and this perseverance.
Mm-hmm.
And she talked a lot about things really went pretty well. She thought because the kids had access to the problems, they had problems they could access in and all these tools. But she talked about the two places that it seems like kids have gotten stuck with. She talked about scale and slope, and the kids are getting stuck. The question is, why do you think they're getting stuck there? What is it that sticks them?
I think what sticks them is that I think too often we teach the scales always 1 when we're teaching slope or we're teaching graphing lines. We don't do a lot of really big numbers, so they never had to make a scale that they counted by 10s maybe on the X and then 5s on the Y's, so they're not used to thinking in that language of, oh, it doesn't always have to be 1, that we can change our scale. So I think that they're so accustomed to it being 1 that that's where they're getting stuck.
And the kids who you saw figure it out, what strategies did they use?
I think a lot of them just looked at their partners and was like, oh, well, where did that number come from? Or I think a few of them I pushed to, well, what's your scale? Like, let's look at the X and Y axis.
So she just said this is what they're not accustomed to. This is her hypothesis about the kids learning.
Uh-huh.
So what could she do to give them strategies to persevere in that case? What would you do now that you kind of know what got them stop persevering? What could you do?
Well, I think the next step would be to give them lots of situations where the scale's not 1 and have them look at maybe more real-world problems where your graphs are going to be in the thousands or they're going to be, bigger than they are. Also, maybe when I teach it in the future, remembering this and coming, like always starting with not using 1 as a scale. Like maybe have 1 be the third day we talk about slope, we bring it back to 1, but always start them off with 2s or 6s or however it works with the problems.
And if they had a chance to use scale going different situations, so that one it was already graphed for them.
Right, and we did do some story problems with rate of change, but not a lot of them we asked them to go to graphing, but it was kind of like the 4th step. So they had to like solve it algebraically, then make a table, and then graph it. So I don't think a lot of people had to get to the graphing part of it. And that may just be an oversight on the teaching, the flow that we went. So maybe focusing more on having the graph.
And then with their strategies with the y-intercept, and that was their other piece you said. So what would you do with that to help them solidify it?
I think that we need to have a conversation about what is an intercept and why do we care about intercepts. Because I think a lot of them, this is in the past, I haven't seen it this year, but they see like y equals 2x plus 4 and they put the 4 on the x-axis instead of the y-axis. I don't know why they do that, but I think that there needs to be more work about intercepts means one of them is 0 and you're looking for the other one, and do more work around what an intercept is. Should help clear up some of that confusion.
So when you see them put the numbers on the wrong axis, what do you do to help them with that, with the strategies?
I should go back and review, like, we're looking at y-intercept, but I think now I'm thinking more about it, maybe I need to be clear about what the y-intercept means and having that discussion about intercepts. So in the past, I've just corrected it and said, no, we always start on the y, but I don't think I've actually answered for them, why do we start on the y? Why is the y so important to us?
She's got enough.
Right there.
Way more. She's got enough things for her head to think about what I want to do next. She's got a real strong strategy about kind of dealing with scale, thinking both in what she will do next time that she introduces this, plus what she can do right now to give them some more tools, some reference points to be able to do that. And plus her thinking, she's going to think about why kids don't put it on the why, and maybe even explore with kids why that is. So she's got all she can, in this moment, kind of work for the next step. But you've got her to the next pieces that she's feeling really good about kids beginning to more and more persevere, and then strategies when kids get stuck, what her next step is. So.
Done.
Nice job.
Can I ask a question,
It's up to
Judge?
you.
No.
At one point, I'm going to though. At one point, she had talked about Raylene did much more than I thought she would, and I was surprised by that. Would it be just as valuable, because you tended to go towards what didn't work? Would it be as valuable to go with? So, what do you think caused Raylene to do that today? Could you have gone that route too?
You can go either route. You can go either route to what those pieces that are. There are multiple entry points into the next journey with her. Always the thing that I'm thinking about is her problem of practice. How do I get her to discuss her problem of practice and something that she might come to a solution? So at some point in time,
Right, I have to go.
he
the other
always
way.
thinks that they did right. She already knows they did right, and that's good. There was a question right in the beginning that she talked about that she was a little bit surprised about some of those things. What made you surprised? Why did you think so? But at some point, you got to get to the place where
Right.
what sticks the kids, because that is. But there's probably 5 or 6 entry points. I just picked the one that
Right.
I picked. It doesn't have to be that one. I think she'll get to the same spot because she'll always get to what the kids didn't do. She'll always get to scale and slope was a problem. That's where she saw them getting stuck. And the interesting piece is I didn't even notice any of that. Not me. It wasn't in what I saw, because that's why our data is so less relevant, because she saw it get stuck. So you could have asked that question. There was a lot of places you could have gone and asked, but that's the one I picked. So
Right. I was just curious about taking it through the posit and through what she said. I was surprised by Raylene because she's not normally that way. What do you think caused that to happen? And when she's not that way, what's it look like?
Right.
Because that would still get to the heart of the perseverance. So I was just curious
either
because
way,
I was listening for big words, and that was one that was
either way,
a big word. But
you were looking for those kind of
That's what she's
teacher's own evaluative words. Yes, that could have totally been fine too. Like I said, it's not like one, oh, that's it. It's both positive and negative evaluative statements that you want to look